Hey, let's jump into the book talk. The beginning part is just comparing the book from this section to the episode of this section. If you're on YouTube, you see I'm holding up a copy of the book, and where the post-it note is where we are. And once again, it's about halfway through. After this episode, we're still barely halfway through. We have a lot of spoiler feedback, but I want to read this first note at the beginning where Becky wrote to us, and Becky wrote, the Lukas character, who hasn't been in season 2 yet through 2 episodes, Becky wrote, the Lukas changes bother me the most when you go from the book to the show. Without Lukas as a shadow to Bernard, how does Juliette react to any of this stuff? I'm curious how it's going to go. So Becky, I was going to talk a lot about Lukas, but the fact he wasn't in this episode at all means that I'm going to wait to kind of talk book talk and spoiler talks about Lukas until his character is back on the show. In a very convoluted general sense, the fact that Lukas was Bernard's shadow in the books, and now that they've made Judge Meadows kind of re-emerging as Bernard's shadow, it feels like a lot of the things that Lukas did in the book may go to the judge. I know that doesn't make too much sense, but, we'll see. To me, the biggest thing is that, again, I mentioned it before, the fact that the judge knows all these secrets, and yet she allowed to keep those secrets, even though she was drunk all the time and could have told them to anybody. To me, that's crazy. They killed Mayor Johns and Deputy Marnes for minor stuff compared to Judge Meadows knows their other silos, knows all the tricks, knows that we're faking people in the cleaning. And it makes me think these showrunners don't have a handle on this story at all.
They weren't as sexy as Judge Meadows. Let's be honest.
We got some feedback to correct us from a couple of people. I pulled this from T. Fisher, who said, 34 years of direct sunlight would decompose organic matter faster than otherwise. So we were talking about, well, if this silo, his rebellion was only 35 years ago, why are there only skeletons outside? According to T. Fisher, that's the way it actually would work, Catfish. What do you think about that?
Listen, I'm willing to embrace this science if it is indeed science, but I'll go with it until someone tells me different, because I always believe the last thing that I've heard.
I also want to say that this wasn't just feedback from T. Fisher. We had it from somebody else as well, and I'm trying to find it. Oh, it was from Vanessa M., who sent us the exact same feedback. And I was like, guys, I don't want to know how you know so much about bodies decomposing.
But thank you for that.
All right. So Catfish, I keep talking about it. And why do I love wool is because once Juliette has her cleaning, it's pretty much the pedal to the metal in the story. I mentioned in the earlier part of our podcast that Walker comes out and tells everybody in the Down Deep, I did it. I did the tape. It's not like a whisper campaign. Shirley doesn't have to figure it out. Walker tells them. And pretty much that is the final spark. And it's just one chapter, but because Walker tells them, the rebellion automatically starts. The book got on with it. It feels like the show is going to do a Cold War, where it's like Bernard is trying to prevent a rebellion from starting, and Shirley's trying to gather forces to start a rebellion. That doesn't happen in the book. In the book, it's pretty much what's Walker, and this you would imagine is at the most an hour after Juliette's cleaning, Walker comes out, tells everybody, hey, I did this trick with supply. Everybody realizes, wait a minute, every other cleaning was being sent out, meant to fail because of bad tape. They wanted people to die ASAP. It's a rebellion immediately in the book, and they just get on with it. And that's why I say the book is pedal to the metal, where the show, we're not going to really begin a rebellion. I'm worried that we won't really begin the rebellion until maybe episode 5 at this rate. I mean, come on.
Well, it's funny because then the show is doing a disservice to itself by showing that line from the book, because that line makes it seem like it is just going to happen immediately. The show shows that line, and then if they're going to dither around here, that's not the best.
So immediately, like I say, the rebellion starts. And one of the first steps of the rebellions is mechanicals like, we got to get people on our side, on our team. So mechanical march up to supply, and there's some, kind of debate. Are they going to join forces? Quickly, they join forces, and supply starts pretty much arming people. Like, hey, we're going to war. We got to fight fire with fire. And believe it or not, up top, people who normally wouldn't handle guns, and in this case, Lukas is up top. He's not down in the mine. He's being trained how to use a gun. Like I said, this thing starts being war immediately, which I think raises the tension. I can understand how a show you're like, maybe we want a slow roll war, but for me, I'm kind of like ready, like let's get to it. And so it frustrates me, and that's why my score's a bit rougher on this episode. I want to talk about a couple things that are different in the novel. First and foremost, I mentioned that Walker doesn't leave their workshop much because they have.
I know you, but you're going to have to let me go because you like dip me right into the spoiler book talk. You
I did,
son of a gun.
Well, this is. Have we really? Once again, are you shocked that there's going to be a rebellion in Silo 18?
No.
Okay, of course you're not shocked. I'm just saying that in the show you seemingly may have to wait 5 hours for it to start. In the book, it immediately started. Let me talk about something that's different in the book that won't spoil it because it's completely different. And that is the character Shirley in the book is a married woman. She has a husband named Mark. Shirley, as I mentioned in season 1 spoiler podcast, Shirley is not a character in the first part of the book. She's a name. What do I mean by that? So it'd be like Juliette went and said goodbye to people in mechanical when she went to be sheriff. She said goodbye to this person. Shirley gave her a hug, like literally that's it. Like it's like a name that mentions here's somebody who works down in on the down deep. It's not until Juliette goes out to clean that in the book Shirley does something and becomes a real character. I joke that Juliette never really even thinks of, oh, I miss my friend Shirley in the first part of the book. But in the second part of the book where, after Juliette's cleaning and Shirley's suddenly a main character, Shirley's like, I got to do this for my great friend Juliette. I got to do it for my great friend Juliette. So I think this is one thing I said in season 1 that the show did wise is they introduced Shirley early. She still doesn't have much to do in season 1, but she's Juliette's friend, and you see that friendship in the scene where they spoon on the bed and that kind of stuff. And she has a husband who they, as you can tell, let me ask you this, based on what you've seen in the show, is Shirley going to be in the rebellion? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so she's in the rebellion in the book as well. But a big twist, because she doesn't have a husband or a significant other in the show, I think it's okay to say that her husband, Mark, dies in the rebellion. And that becomes another kind of pain point for her in the whole, she's dedicated to the cause. She's good friends with Juliette, as we find out, in the second half in the book. But she suddenly has a second pain to her in that her husband dies. So that is not, when we talked about earlier our silo speculation, the first character to die, though. Do you want me to tell you? I think it could be different on the show, but do you want me to tell you the next character to die in this part of the book?
No, I don't want to be ruined.
Okay. All right. No problem. I don't want
to be ruined. Haven't they followed the major killings pretty well?
They did. They changed a lot of motivations for them in the kind of way they happened. But you're right. Deputy Marnes dies in the book around that time. The mayor dies in the book almost exactly at that moment. So that is pretty consistent. So there are rumors that they may not kill characters they kill in the book, but let me just put it this way. Of today's second episode, in the book, at least 2 of the characters who appear in this episode are not alive by the end of the first book.
Yeah.
You bloodthirsty bastard.
I want Walker to go. I'm tired of her.
You don't want to know if Walker is one of those 2, so I will remain quiet.
Okay.
All right. Hey, Catfish, any other question you had about the book compared to the show that you want to get out before we say goodbye to you?
I asked it during the show, and I think that was that you answered it. So,
okay.
We'll see you next week.
Everybody, if you want to stick around, this is where we're going to get into thick book spoilers. So we'll say goodbye to Catfish, and we will go. So the first thing, let's answer those questions from the silo speculation. Who is the next character to die in the book? I'm not sure. I don't think this character will die very quickly on the show, but the first character to die in the book is Knox. I mentioned that once Walker tells everybody down deep, hey, I did it. I switched out the heat tape. The whole down deep says we got to rebel, and Knox, being a leader, wants to lead this rebellion. I do think Knox is actually going to lead the rebellion in the show, but the show, for reasons that drive me crazy, is going to stretch it out. And so it's going to last a long time before Knox gets on boards and leads. I want to put a guess into what Knox said to the gentleman in the wheelchair in the shop. Based on book knowledge, I would guess this is a bit like what Tyrion did in season 2 of Game of Thrones, if you watch that show. In that show, Tyrion went to the pyromancer and said, I don't want you making this wildfire for my sister. It's too dangerous. And then beat, I want you to make it for me. I think Knox told this guy in the wheelchair, number one, if anybody comes to you and says, make weapons, don't do it. Now, number two, I want you to start making weapons that I can control. That would be my guess if they keep Knox true to the Knox in the books. That's what I imagine he does. Will he die in the show? I'm not so sure. I think they actually may let Knox live a bit. But Knox is one of the first casualties of the war in Silo 18 in the books. The other Silo speculation question we asked was, which character will be the next to be sentenced to a cleaning in the books? That character is Lukas. Lukas is Bernard's shadow in IT to be the leader of the Silo, but in this version of the story in the books, Bernard did not realize just how close Lukas had gotten to Juliette. And he finds out through various means how close Lukas is to Juliette. And so Bernard pretty much, you want to go out, kind of twisting Lukas's words. Lukas is saying he wants to go out, but he means out of a room. And so Bernard uses that to sentence Lukas to a cleaning. Which characters don't exist in the book? Well, you've read the book if you're here listening to the spoiler section, and you know that Judge Meadows doesn't. Most don't, but the one that really is kind of like, who is this character, is Judge Meadows. So again, I'm going to talk about Lukas more once he shows up, but I'm flabbergasted that the showrunners have done this. If the final thing I guess I'll say about Lukas is that if you ask people who read this first book, who are your 3 favorite characters, they're either going to say Juliette, or they're going to say Solo, the person in Silo 17 behind the door, or they'd say Lukas. And I'd imagine Lukas could be as high as their second, if you ranked them, most people would have Lukas at least number 2 of their favorite characters. And the show has destroyed him in season 1 by stupid choices, and then those stupid choices are destroying the character here in season 2. It is crazy. Now, I saw some people on Reddit, because I mentioned on Reddit, I think, boy, the show has ruined the character of Lukas, who's one of the favorite characters of the book, and people on Reddit are like, well, I like Lukas okay, or I didn't like this, I didn't like that, and I was kind of shocked that some people read the book and didn't feel this way. How do you feel about Lukas? Again, I'll go more into his spoiler role coming up, but go down in the comments and let me know if there are other things that you want to know about Lukas. I guess the final thing before I get to your feedback is Bernard. Bernard in this episode, the one thing I'll say about the episode is it's making him more well-rounded character. In the show and in the book, he can come across as a mustache-twirling villain. But what's unique about Bernard is that Bernard, even in the book, has moments where he's a real character. And I love the moment in the book where Bernard is talking to Lukas, and Bernard is like, the people who did this are terrible. Playing by their rules, the founders' rules, it allows us to live, but playing by their rules causes us to suffer. And to me, that's the book showing that Bernard, even though from everybody else's perspective, he is a mustache-twirling villain, to me, that's a scene in the book which really does show there's a method to his madness and a real character there. Your mileage may vary. Once again, go down on the comments on YouTube and let me know what you think. Let me get to your feedback of spoilers, and through your feedback, we'll get to some more spoilers that hopefully will whet your appetite for reading this great book. Aaron wrote, I hope we get to see Donald or Thurman flashbacks. That could be a great cliffhanger ending for this season. Aaron, I think that would be fun, but I'm almost positive, based on the reviews that people saw the first 9 episodes, I'm almost positive that Donald or Thurman, Senator Thurman, I believe you're talking about, if they show up, they're not going to show up until episode 10, and maybe not even then. There's a chance that they really don't do shift at all in this 4 season that they're trying to do. And that brings me to Trouble Follows feedback, who says, how many seasons would it take to cover all 3 books? And then Trouble Follows questions 10. There is going to be a point where I talk about TV show spoilers. You may be asking yourself, how do you know TV show spoilers? I don't. I don't have access to the screeners, but I read reviews of season 2 that I could. I read a handful of them. And in those reviews, they explain something that happens in episode 9 of this season. And because it happens in episode 9 of this season, and you're like, well, gee, that only happens at this point in the book, you can kind of make some speculation of how the season will end or how far they'll get into the book. If you don't want to hear that, leave now. Okay, if you haven't left, I read a review which talked about a real daring underwater sequence of Juliette in the 9th episode. If you've read the first book in this trilogy, Wool, you know Juliette goes underwater to get the pumps going, the real pumps going to get the silo dry so she can get down to all that stuff. But of course, that action beat happens 75% of the way into Wool. If that's happening in episode 9, there's no way the remaining 25% of the book can happen in this season. So I am real worried that they're not going to finish the first book through 2 seasons, which to me is crazy. To me, it says there's no way they're going to really do Shift. Shift, as you know, the second book in the trilogy is almost entirely flashbacks or happens in the past from where we are now. Guys, I would worry. If you love the book Shift, it may not really be happening in this show. That's my thought. What do you think? If episode 9 is Juliette's deep dive into the water that has flooded Silo 17, they're not going to get to the kids in Silo 17. Do you think, here's a question for you listeners, do you think we'll ever meet the kids who live in the book in Silo 17? Or the show will cut them, which is what I fear. Go down in the comments and let me know. We got this feedback from a good buddy Tim's Retro Corner. They wrote, hey, with Lukas out of the picture, who's going to talk on the radio in the IT room to Juliette? That was such a great part of the book, Tim. That's what I thought. But this show doesn't love the things that I loved in the book. So I don't know if anybody is going to talk on the radio to Juliette. Maybe she'll just talk and taunt Bernard. Who knows? We got this great feedback from 325 Naboo. Boy, I love Naboo. It's a great place to live rather than the silo. She felt season 2, episode 1 was a great intro to the new silo, but she didn't like certain changes that it made to how Juliette, kind of got in and dealt with her situation. Like Juliette in the book cuts off her suit and doesn't have any clothes in Silo 17 for a bit and wears a tablecloth for a bit, and that feels maybe very real. Well, the show cut that entirely, and so we'll have to see. 325 Naboo also says, I can't wait to see more of the relationship between Juliette and Solo in the show. I think that's coming next week. I think that's going to really turn it around. Armin wrote, I just can't get myself around how much they changed from the book. This makes the show for me unwatchable. If I didn't know the books, I would say, hey, it's a great show. But since I've read the books, this show is a no for me. Oh, Armin, I apologize. I'm in a weird space where I get really frustrated, but I can still see that the show is still good. So hopefully my frustration doesn't upset you if you love the show, and hopefully my frustration isn't, weak enough if you want me to be like you and like, boy, this show's a big mess. Hey, we've just touched on some spoilery stuff. Is there a spoiler topic you want me to talk about? Are you frustrated that I don't talk more about Shift or Dust in this spoiler stuff? I'm sticking to just the spoilers from Wool. On YouTube, go down in the comments and let me know, or reach out on any social media app at @PHQ. The word double, the single letter P for podcast, HQ for headquarters, at @PHQ. I'll talk to you guys next week.